Nathaniel R. Brazil was born on September 22nd, 1986, in Lake Worth, Florida. He grew up in a normal working-class family, without any particular behavioral issues. However, as he entered adolescence, he began to exhibit outbursts of aggression and disciplinary problems. Teachers noted that Nathaniel often did not listen, got irritated over trifles, and did not take criticism well. Despite this, those around him saw him as a good-natured boy, incapable of serious violence. He was not an outcast at school, but he often felt underappreciated and resentful. May 26, 2009 was a fateful day for him. It was the last day of the school year. The atmosphere at school was relaxed, and everyone was getting ready for summer vacation. In the morning, Nathaniel was sent home for disciplinary reasons. He had thrown a balloon in the hallway. Hurt and humiliated, he returned home, where he found a .25 caliber pistol belonging to a family friend. He hesitated for a moment, but then, driven by anger and teenage stubbornness, he returned to school. Upon entering the building, he encountered his English teacher, Barry Grunow, the man who had previously reprimanded him. Without saying a word, Nathaniel raised his weapon and shot him at point-blank range, killing him instantly. After the shot, the teenager pointed the gun at another teacher, but did not fire. The police arrested him a few minutes later. Nathaniel looked confused and said that he did not want to kill. But it was too late. The trial was closely watched by the public. Prosecutors insisted on premeditated murder, while the defense argued that the teenager had suffered an emotional breakdown and did not realize the consequences of his actions. The jury found him guilty of second-degree murder and aggravated assault. As a result, the judge sentenced Brazil to 28 years in prison and 7 years of probation after his release. Charles Andrew Williams was born on February 8, 1986, in Frederick, Maryland, into a family where his parents' relationship quickly fell apart. After the divorce, the boy stayed with his dad, and his mom soon disappeared from his life. When he was 13, his father moved him to Santa Ana, California, hoping for a fresh start. But at Santana High School, Charles faced constant ridicule. He was teased for his height, appearance, and shyness, and was often beaten and humiliated. Teachers noticed that the boy was becoming increasingly withdrawn, and friends recalled how he talked about attempting to take his own life, and even joked about Columbine. No one took these words seriously. Williams experienced a constant feeling of helplessness. He tried to see the school psychologist, but he was unable to see him due to being overloaded. With each passing day, the teenager became more and more distant from those around him, spending time alone and listening to heavy music, in which he found a reflection of his emotions. The day before the tragedy, he told his friends that he was going to do something big, but they just laughed. The next morning, he took his father's .22 caliber revolver from a locked cabinet and went to school. On March 5, 2001, at around 9:20 a.m., Williams entered the bathroom, took out the gun, and opened fire. His first victim was a boy his age who was standing at the sink. Charles then went out into the hallway and began shooting at students at random. Panic broke out in the school. Children hid under desks and ran out into the courtyard. An attempt by security guards to intervene ended with Williams wounding both of them. When the police arrived, the shooter was in the bathroom reloading his gun. He calmly raised his hands and said, "It's just me." The investigation established that Charles killed 2 people and wounded 13 others. During questioning, he explained his actions by saying that he was tired of being bullied and wanted it all to end. In August 2002, the court found him guilty on all counts and sentenced him to 50 years to life in prison. Despite his age, the judge treated him as an adult, considering that the crime was premeditated. During his years in prison, Williams repeatedly expressed remorse, claiming that he had made a terrible mistake in seeking attention. Attempts by his lawyers to have the case reviewed were unsuccessful. In 2024, 23 years after the tragedy, he was denied parole for the first time. Barry Dale Lukaitis was born on February 26, 1981, in Moses Lake, Washington, and from childhood was characterized by withdrawn and anxious behavior. His parents were constantly fighting, and when Barry turned 14, his mother filed for divorce. She suffered from depression and often told her son about her attempts to take her own life, even suggesting that they do it together on Valentine's Day. Lukaitis grew up in an atmosphere of alienation and emotional instability. He was lonely, did not get along well with his classmates, and was fascinated by dark literature and violent films, including Natural-Born Killers and Stephen King's novel Rage, whose protagonist inspired him. Psychologists later diagnosed him with dysthymic disorder and clinical depression. On February 6, 1996, Lukaitis came to school dressed in black clothes and a long cloak, resembling a Wild West gunslinger. In his backpack was a .30-30 caliber hunting rifle and 2 pistols belonging to his father. During the 5th algebra class, he opened fire without warning. The first shots killed 2 students, Arnold Fritz and Manuel Vela, and 13-year-old Natalie Hintz was seriously wounded. Lukaitis then fatally wounded teacher Leona Kyres and took the remaining students hostage. He was standing at the blackboard, pointing his gun at his classmates, when Coach John Lane entered the classroom. Realizing that the teenager was going to use someone as a human shield, Lane volunteered to become a hostage himself. And at the decisive moment, he disarmed the shooter and knocked him to the ground, holding him until the police arrived. The investigation showed that the attack had been carefully planned. Lukaitis admitted that he wanted to kill Vela out of personal animosity, but claimed that the other deaths were accidental. His mental state became a central issue in the trial. The defense insisted on insanity, claiming that he suffered from severe mood disorders. But the prosecution proved that he had clear intentions and had prepared for the murders. In September 1997, the court found Barry Lukaitis guilty on all counts and sentenced him to 2 life sentences and 205 years in prison without the possibility of parole. Years later, the U.S. Supreme Court banned automatic life sentences for minors, and Lukaitis' case was reviewed. In 2017, he sent a letter of apology to the court, stating that he realized the gravity of his actions. However, the court only formally reduced his sentence to 189 years in prison. Lukaitis continues to serve his sentence at Clallam Bay Prison, remaining one of the most tragic figures in the history of U.S. school shootings. An example of how a combination of psychological isolation, domestic chaos, and media violence can breed destructive teenage rage. William Cornick, a 15-year-old student at Corpus Christi Catholic College in Leeds, grew up in a well-to-do family and was a smart, calm, and conscientious student. His teachers described him as a diligent and well-mannered teenager, and his behavior never caused any serious concerns. However, shortly after he was diagnosed with diabetes, the young man's personality changed. The disease robbed him of his dream of joining the army, and he became irritable and withdrawn. Over the years, he harbored a deep resentment, and he felt particular animosity toward his Spanish teacher, Anne McGuire, whom he considered the embodiment of all his failures. On April 28, 2014, Cornick came to school with a knife, having decided in advance to kill McGuire. During class, he suddenly pulled out the weapon and stabbed the woman 7 times in the back and neck. The wounded woman tried to run to the hallway, but her attacker caught up with her. A colleague, teacher Susan Francis, managed to shield Anne and drag her into a neighboring room, saving other students. Cornick, showing no emotion, returned to the classroom and told his classmates that his only regret was not killing her. He later confessed that he had also planned to kill 2 other teachers. The police arrived quickly and arrested him without resistance. During questioning, the teenager remained calm, openly stating that he had no regrets. Psychiatrists noted a complete lack of empathy and a tendency towards sadism. At the trial, the defense tried to cite his young age and possible mental disorders, but the prosecution proved that the murder was planned and committed deliberately. On November 3, 2014, the Leeds Crown Court found William Cornick guilty and sentenced him to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 20 years. The verdict caused a public outcry. The tragedy shook the UK, raising questions about hidden mental disorders in teenagers and the need for a timely response to warning signs. The story of Anne McGuire served as a reminder that even in a normal school, the unthinkable can happen if indifference outweighs caution. Anthony Sincero was born in 1979 and grew up in the small town of Blackwell, South Carolina. He was raised in a poor African-American family and faced injustice and prejudice from childhood. At school, Sincero was considered a difficult teenager, withdrawn, quick-tempered, and distrustful of teachers. Teachers complained about his behavior. He often argued, did not complete assignments, and was temporarily suspended from class several times. After being expelled in 1994, he managed to return to school, but the situation did not change. In the spring of 1995, he was expelled again, this time for making obscene gestures on the school bus. Sincero himself perceived this as racial injustice. His mother later said that her son felt isolated and humiliated, and that the disciplinary measures were too harsh simply because he was black. On October 12th, 1995, he came to the school from which he had been expelled. He was carrying a .32 caliber revolver, which he had apparently taken from home. Anthony entered through the back door of the building and headed for the office of math teacher Johnny Thompson. Without saying a word, he shot him. He then went out into the hallway, where he encountered another teacher, Phyllis Sen, who tried to get away, but he managed to shoot her as she ran. The woman fell and was later found in the teacher's lounge. Doctors initially thought she had suffered a heart attack, but an autopsy revealed a bullet wound to her right shoulder that had pierced her lung. Sincero continued moving through the school, but according to eyewitnesses, he did not appear angry, but rather confused, as if he did not fully understand what was happening. A few minutes later, he killed himself by shooting himself in the temple. His body was found near the door of a school office. The investigation showed that he did not leave a note or make any direct threats before the incident. However, many students and acquaintances recalled that he often spoke of being treated unfairly. After the tragedy, discussions began in the city about whether the shooting was an act of revenge or the result of a mental breakdown fueled by feelings of isolation and racial pressure. James Allison Jamie Rouse was born in 1978 and grew up in the small town of Linville, Tennessee. He was a withdrawn, unsociable teenager who preferred solitude and music. At school, he was often teased and considered strange, but he rarely showed any emotion. Teachers noted him as a quiet but unstable student, prone to depression. According to acquaintances, Rouse often spoke of his hatred for school and people, but no one took it seriously. His relationship with his parents was strained, and his interaction with his peers was limited to a few friends, one of whom, Stephen Abbott, played a fateful role on the day of the tragedy. On November 15th, 1995, Rouse hid a .22 caliber Remington Viper semi-automatic rifle behind some bushes near the school. He asked Abbott to drive him to the building, saying the cryptic phrase, "It's going to happen today." When they arrived, Rouse entered through the north entrance. In the hallway, he encountered two teachers, Carolyn Yancey and Carolyn Foster. Without saying a word, he shot both of them in front of dozens of students. Yancey was seriously wounded, and Foster died on the spot. He then aimed his weapon at football coach Ron Shire, but missed. The bullet hit 14-year-old student Diana Collins, fatally wounding her. After that, one of the teachers and a student disarmed him and held him until the police arrived. The investigation showed that Rouse had prepared for the attack in advance. He did not resist arrest and later stated that he just wanted it all to end. Investigators found no clear motive, but psychologists noted signs of depression and severe alienation. His friend Stephen Abbott admitted that he knew about the plans but did not tell anyone. The court found Rouse guilty of first and second-degree murder, as well as attempted murder. The sentence was harsh: life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, plus 42 years. Abbott received 40 years, which was later reduced to 27, and he was released in 2014. Rouse remains in Turney Center Prison, where he is serving a life sentence. Following U.S. Supreme Court rulings limiting the use of life imprisonment for minors, his case is subject to review, but no new hearings have been scheduled yet. Luke Woodham, born on February 5, 1981, in Pearl, Mississippi, grew up as a withdrawn and lonely teenager who was often ridiculed by his peers. His life seemed ordinary, but beneath the outward calm lay deep inner conflicts and growing resentment. After breaking up with his girlfriend, he began to talk more and more about the meaninglessness of existence and revenge on those who, he believed, had made him an outcast. Woodham became increasingly distant from his family and friends, finding solace in philosophical and gloomy reflections on suffering, which gradually prepared him for the tragic events of October 1997. On the morning of October 1st, Woodham attacked his mother, Mary Ann Woodham, fatally stabbing her. He then got into her car and drove to Pearl High School. Hiding a rifle under a long coat, he entered the building and handed a manifesto to a teenage acquaintance, in which he wrote that he was tired of being a victim and that society deserves retribution. He then opened fire, killing 2 students, Lydia K. Dew and his ex-girlfriend Christina Menfey, and wounding 7 others. His attempt to escape was unsuccessful. Assistant Principal Joel Myrick stopped him by pointing a gun at him and holding him until the police arrived. The investigation revealed a manifesto with quotes from Nietzsche and confessions of tormenting thoughts of violence. It soon became clear that Woodham was part of a group of teenagers who were interested in occult ideas, but it was not possible to prove the existence of a conspiracy. The court rejected the defense's arguments of insanity, finding Woodham sane. He was sentenced to 3 life terms and 140 years in prison without parole until 2046. Jose Horacio Reyes was born on July 2, 2001, in Reno, Nevada, to a family of Mexican immigrants. His childhood was marked by constant change. His family moved several times. His father often changed jobs, and relations at home were tense. Despite his outward reserve, Reyes was intelligent and curious. But over time, he began to distance himself from his classmates. He was teased at school, and over time, this teasing turned into constant bullying. After a conflict with his father in a subsequent court case, the boy became increasingly depressed. In the months leading up to the tragedy, he was taking antidepressants and antipsychotic drugs, which, according to investigators, may have affected his emotional state. On the morning of October 21st, 2013, Jose Reyes arrived at Sparks Middle School with a gun belonging to his parents. On the basketball court, before classes began, he took out the weapon and shot 12-year-old student KJ Searcy, wounding him in the shoulder. Math teacher Michael Lansbury, a Marine Corps veteran, tried to intervene and calm the teenager, but was fatally wounded. Reyes then fired at another teacher, missed, and then wounded another student, Mason Davis, who was trying to help. A few seconds later, he killed himself. 2 partially loaded magazines and 2 suicide notes were found at the scene of the tragedy, in which he wrote that he was tired of being bullied and saw no other way out. The investigation established that the weapon had been taken from home without his parents' knowledge, and that the teenager's father had previously been convicted of child abuse. The case caused a public outcry, prompting discussion of the problems of school violence and gun control. There was no trial in the case. The shooter died at the scene, and his father was charged with negligent storage of a firearm. This tragedy was one of the reasons for the tightening of security measures in Nevada schools and the resumption of the national debate on psychological help for children experiencing bullying and depression. Thomas Michael T.J. Lane III was born on September 19, 1994, in Ohio. He grew up in a dysfunctional family. His parents often fought, and his father had problems with the law. Lane grew up to be a withdrawn and unsociable teenager who increasingly distanced himself from those around him. Classmates recalled that he rarely socialized, preferring to spend time alone. Behind his outward silence lay deep inner anxiety and resentment toward the world around him. In high school, Lane was transferred to Lake Academy, an alternative school for students with behavioral problems. There, he became even more isolated, and sinister posts reflecting his growing aggression appeared on the internet. On the morning of February 27, 2012, Lane arrived at Chardon High School, where he often met with other students before class. At 7:30 a.m., he took out a .22 caliber pistol and opened fire on a group of students waiting for the school bus. In front of dozens of children, he shot and killed 16-year-old Daniel Parmertor, 17-year-old Russell King, and 16-year-old Demetrius Hulin. 3 others were wounded, one of whom was left paralyzed. When panic broke out, teachers Frank Hall and Joseph Ricci showed heroism, leading students out of the building and helping the wounded. Lane tried to escape but was soon detained by police near his car. The investigation established that he had stolen the weapon from his uncle, and that the motives for the shooting could be linked to personal conflict and psychological instability. During questioning, Lane stated that he did not regret what he had done. At the trial, having already been found sane and tried as an adult, he behaved provocatively, smiling, wearing a t-shirt with the word "killer" on it, and insulting the victims' families. In March 2013, he was sentenced to 3 life terms without the possibility of early release. Philip Chisholm, a teenager who grew up in a family with adjustment difficulties after moving, appeared withdrawn and depressed at the time of the crime. Teacher Colleen Ritzer, 24, was a young and attentive educator who stayed behind after class to help Philip adjust. Outwardly, Chisholm seemed like a quiet student. But behind this facade lay serious psychological problems. According to expert testimony, he heard voices and experienced psychotic episodes. The context of the crime includes Chisholm's recent move from Tennessee to Massachusetts, family difficulties, and, according to the defense, growing mental health issues. Ritter tried several times to connect with him. On the last day, she kept Philip after class in an attempt to help. Witnesses noted his obvious and increasing tension that evening. The main event unfolds on October 22nd, 2013. Cameras record Ritter walking down the hallway to the bathroom, Chisholm leaving class, putting on gloves and following her. In the bathroom, he strangled the teacher, then stabbed her at least 16 times. Sexual assault also took place. He later carried the body outside, attempted to hide evidence in the woods, and stole the victim's credit cards and clothing. Police arrested Chisholm near the highway. A bloody knife, mask, and gloves were found in his backpack. Law enforcement gathered video recordings, physical evidence, and testimony. The defense insisted on insanity due to psychosis, while prosecutors insisted on intent and planning. Chisholm was tried as an adult. The jury found him guilty of first-degree murder, rape, and armed robbery. Because he was a minor at the time of the crime, restrictions on the use of life without parole applied. A sentencing hearing is scheduled for December 22nd. Appeals and possible psychiatric evaluations remain expected steps in the process. Mitchell Johnson and Andrew Golden are two teenagers from Arkansas, whose names will forever remain in U.S. history. Johnson, a 13-year-old boy with a difficult childhood and signs of aggression, and 11-year-old Golden, a withdrawn student with a love of weapons, together committed one of the most violent crimes ever to occur in American schools. Both were raised in poor but stable families. However, internal conflicts, a desire for self-affirmation, and a fascination with violence gradually led them to tragedy. On March 24, 1998, they brought a minivan filled with 9 types of weapons and more than 2,000 rounds of ammunition stolen from Golden's grandfather's house to school. Around noon, Golden set off the fire alarm, forcing students and teachers to leave the building. At that moment, Johnson, who was hiding behind trees, opened fire. Within minutes, the teenagers killed 5 people, including 4 female students and teacher Shannon Wright, who shielded a child with her body. 10 more people were injured. After the attack, the young shooters tried to escape, but were apprehended 10 minutes later. The investigation revealed the shocking extent of the preparation for the crime. Food supplies and sleeping bags were found in the van. The boys had planned to escape. The public was shocked. Arkansas had never seen such tragedies before. Psychologists claim that both criminals showed signs of adolescent psychopathy and empathy disorders. At the trial, Johnson read a letter of apology, but their young age prevented them from being sentenced to life imprisonment. In August 1998, both were sentenced to prison terms until they reached the age of 21, the maximum allowed by law. Michael Adam Carnell was born on June 1st, 1983, in Kentucky, to John and Ann Carnell. As a child, he was a quiet and withdrawn boy who preferred solitude and books to noisy company. His family was considered well off, but Michael felt isolated. At school, He was often the target of ridicule. He was teased for his appearance, manner of speech, and interests. Over time, he developed disturbing symptoms. He became suspicious, covering the windows and vents in his room, believing that he was being watched. After his arrest, doctors diagnosed him with schizophrenia and chronic depression. A few weeks before the tragedy, Michael began collecting weapons, stealing rifles and pistols from his neighbors' homes and garages. He hinted several times to his classmates that he was preparing something big, but his words were taken as a joke. On the morning of December 1st, 1997, he wrapped a shotgun and a rifle in a blanket, pretending to be carrying an art project, and hid a Ruger .22 pistol in his backpack. Arriving at school with his sister, he inserted earplugs, took out his weapons, and headed toward a group of students gathered for morning prayer. Carnell opened fire on the teenagers standing in front of him, firing 10 bullets. 3 girls died at the scene: Nicole Hadley, Jessica James, and Casey Steger. 6 other students were wounded, including sisters Melissa and Mandy Jenkins. After the shooting, Michael lowered his weapon and said to a classmate, "Please kill me. I can't believe I did that." He voluntarily surrendered to the principal. During questioning, he was unable to explain his actions, repeating only that he was sure his parents did not love him, and his classmates hated him. Psychiatrists later confirmed that he was suffering from a severe mental disorder at the time of the crime. In 1998, Carnell pleaded guilty, citing his mental illness, and was sentenced to 3 life terms with the possibility of parole after 25 years. Natalie Rupnow, a 15-year-old student at Abundant Life Christian School in Madison, Wisconsin, was known as a quiet and shy girl. Her parents and teachers described her as a withdrawn teenager who was not prone to aggression. However, in recent months, signs of depression and irritability began to appear in her behavior. Classmates noted that she began to avoid communication and often sat alone, lost in thought. No one noticed any direct signs of impending violence. Everything looked like typical growing pains. On December 18, 2023, Natalie came to school as usual, without arousing suspicion. Classes proceeded as usual until 11 a.m., when she took out a gun hidden in her backpack. Suddenly, she opened fire right in the classroom, fatally wounding 1 classmate and her teacher. She then continued to shoot at students, injuring 6 more. 2 of them were in critical condition. Panic swept through the building. Children locked themselves in classrooms, teachers gave lockdown orders, and only after a few minutes did the shooting stop. Natalie, realizing what she had done, turned the gun on herself and committed suicide. Police officers arrived at the scene within minutes. At that time, a young second-grade student was in the classroom and dialed 911 to report the shooting. This helped emergency responders quickly localize the situation. The school was evacuated, and the students were taken to a safe place where they were reunited with their parents. The investigation found that the gun belonged to a family member, but it's still unclear how the girl got access to it. Investigators found no signs of a conspiracy or outside influence. There were no messages on her phone about plans to attack. Natalie's parents cooperated with the police, shocked by what had happened. The tragedy shocked the entire country, not only because of the number of victims, but also because the shooter was a girl. Cases of female involvement in such crimes are extremely rare. On August 8, 1988, Jeffrey James Weiss was born, a teenager from the Red Lake Indian Reservation, whose life had been tragic from the start. His childhood was marked by violence and instability. His father committed suicide when Jeff was 8, and his mother was left disabled after an accident. Left in the care of his grandparents, Police Sergeant Darrell Lucier, he grew up withdrawn and alienated. His classmates bullied him, and constant moves and feelings of isolation exacerbated his depression. Against a backdrop of loneliness and instability, Weiss became increasingly immersed in dark ideologies, creating gloomy internet animations and admiring Nazism and the Columbine tragedy, seeing it as a protest against a society that, in his opinion, had rejected him. On March 21, 2005, he decided to turn his thoughts into reality.
In a house on the lake, Weiss shot his sleeping grandfather and his girlfriend. Then, armed with a police weapon and body armor, headed to the school where he had previously studied. Upon entering the building, he killed a security guard, an English teacher, and 5 students, wounding 9 others. When the police arrived, the teenager engaged in a shootout, was wounded, and voluntarily took his own life. The investigation showed that the crime had been carefully planned. Notes were found in his home describing his hatred of life on the reservation and his desire to cleanse the world. His psychological state was exacerbated by antidepressants, which increased his aggression, a fact that later became the subject of public debate.
Gary Scott Pennington was born in 1975 and grew up in a poor family in Elliott County, Kentucky. His father was an unemployed miner receiving disability benefits, and his mother was a homemaker. Despite the difficulties, Pennington was considered a gifted student. He participated in academic teams, won regional science competitions, and was passionate about mathematics. However, his family's move to Carter County in 1992 was a difficult experience for him. He had trouble adjusting to his new school and felt isolated. Teachers noticed strange traits in him: excessive introversion, dark fantasies, and an interest in violence. His essays, in which he described death and murder, caused particular concern among teachers. On the afternoon of January 18, 1993, Pennington came to school with his father's .38 caliber revolver. During the 7th English class, he suddenly pulled out the gun and shot his teacher, Diana McDavid. The first shot missed, but the second hit, killing her instantly.
The school's head custodian, Marvin Hicks, ran to the scene, and the teenager shot him too, fatally wounding him. Panic broke out in the classroom. The students initially thought it was a theatrical performance, but quickly realized that a real murder was taking place. After the shots, Pennington took his classmates hostage, threatening to kill himself or others. After a while, he began to release the students in pairs, and then surrendered to the police who had arrived. The investigation revealed that the conflict with McDavid began because of a C grade on an essay based on Stephen King's novel Rage. In his essay, Pennington described school murders, and the teacher found his text disturbing. The perpetrator later confessed that he wanted to kill 2 people in order to receive the death penalty. The court found him guilty but mentally ill. In February 1995, he was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 25 years.
While serving his sentence at the Kentucky Eastern Correctional Complex, Pennington continued to display aggression. In 2014, he attacked a prison employee, for which he received an additional 20-year sentence. Today, he remains in custody, showing no signs of remorse. All these stories are united not only by violence. They are linked by a cold shadow falling on a place that should have been safe. School, a symbol of knowledge, trust, and the future, turned into an arena of fear, in despair. Each of these teenagers once sat at a desk, listened to lessons, and dreamed of growing up. But at some point, something broke in their minds, and their familiar world turned into a nightmare. These crimes remind us that monsters are not always born in basements and prisons. Sometimes they sit in the next classroom, looking at the same blackboard as us. And the scariest thing is that no one notices when a kind gaze turns into an abyss. Cherish the silence of schools, because behind it may lie a cry that no one will have time to hear.